The morning the water stopped, I thought it was just one of those things frozen line, a busted pump, the kind of small suburban annoyance you fix with a wrench and a swear and a cold beer later. I went to the sink, turned the tap, and got a cough of air, and then nothing, like the house had been holding its breath and decided not to breathe. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonah across the street. "You out of water too?" 3 words, plain, and the kind of thing that starts little conspiracies between neighbors. So I grabbed my jacket and walked outside. And right there at the curb, the ground looked like somebody had dug up a memory-fresh soil pile, a lid half off, the municipal box exposed like some private secret someone wanted to hide. I knelt down, wiped the dirt with the back of my hand, and the valve was turned almost all the way off. Somebody had reached in and throttled the whole block. It's a ridiculous power, turning a community's water down to a whisper, and in the stupid, slow-motion way that rage sometimes shows up. First you laugh a little, and then your hands go cold. I knew exactly who I suspected. Not because of evidence, but because when a neighborhood has a tyrant, you learn the shape of them. Marlene Ellis had the shape of a tyrant. Clipboard, HOA sash, a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She prided herself on rules the way other people pride themselves on church or country. They were a place she could stand and feel bigger than the rest of us. I didn't go looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to be a victim of someone's private theatrics either. I turned the valve back on, careful, fingers sticky with mud, and water answered like a living thing, relieved. Marlene appeared from the bushes before I could stand, her visor crooked, a phone in her hand like it was a badge. "Don't touch municipal infrastructure," she said, the kind of clipped sentence you'd give to a child who'd rearranged the living room. "You don't get to decide what happens to community utilities." "You don't either," I said, pushing my jacket up to wipe my palms. "It's illegal to tamper. If this is a complaint, call the city. Don't play God." She smiled that small, brittle smile and said something that still makes my stomach drop. "People like you always trying to start trouble. We'll see who the city believes." It wasn't a threat so much as a promise to fight, and I understood then that this wasn't about water. It was about control. It was about Marlene's fear that if anyone else could act freely on our street, her little kingdom would shrink. That night, I set up a cheap motion cam near the box because you don't accuse without proof. You gather facts, you stack them like honest coins, and you make sure when the town looks, they see the truth. 2 nights later, at 3 in the morning, the light on the cam blinked and caught Marlene in profile, hoodie up against the cold, muttering to herself, pliers in hand. She crouched deliberate, practiced, and turned the valve. The footage shook my chest in a way words couldn't. There she was, under a streetlight, doing what she'd been denying in daylight. The camera recorded her hands, the motion of her shoulders, the arrogance of someone who believed rules applied to other people. I didn't confront her that night. I let neighbors see the footage first. Jonah, who runs a landscaping company, watched it, and then laughed, only that little laugh that means your jaws hurt, but you can't stop it, and said, "File this." Denise from the corner house, the kind of retired schoolteacher who still believes in fairness because she taught it for 30 years, came by and said, "We need to make a record. This can't be swept under the rug." The footage changed the way people looked at Marlene. She'd been a presence that blurred into the background for years now. She was a person on a screen, making a choice. Marlene doubled down. She filled the neighborhood group chat with posts about unauthorized water use and suspicious activity, and she included scanned copies of bylaws that might as well have been written to suit her mood that week. The HOA meetings became her stage. She could speak for an hour and call it diligence, and people who didn't know any better nodded like they were watching careful governance. I went to the meeting with a USB and a copy of the footage, and for the first time I watched how power moves in small doses, glances, half smiles, the way people defer to the loudest voice in the room. When I played the clip in that crowded community center, there was a sound like a wind going through leaves. People who had known Marlene their whole lives shifted. She stood and opened her mouth, and for a moment she was all calm storms. "This is doctored," she said, old lines used new. "You have no right." But then the footage was played again, clear, undeniable, and the silence in the room turned from polite to pointed. You could see the edges of her composure fraying, little threads of panic showing under the professional mask. That should have been the end of it. Evidence, complaint, a city inspector, a fine maybe, a formal apology delivered with as much dignity as you could muster. But where there's a person who loses face, there are scores to be settled. Things started happening around my property. Hoses cut, sprinklers bent, garden gnomes moved like mocking little witnesses. Flyers showed up on my mailbox accusing me of wasting water and reckless behavior. Somebody spray-painted "Watch Yourself" on a plywood board near my driveway. It wasn't just property damage. It was intimidation, the kind of slow, domestic cruelty that used everyday items to send a message. And then one night, one of those stupid, cinematic nights that only happen in stories, and then, for some reason, our Levisa pipe joint failed. Marlene had been back at the box, trying to prove something, I don't know what, maybe that she could still make the neighborhood bend. The joint snapped under pressure like a neck being pinched, and water shot up in a black, gushing fountain that turned the street into a river and soaked her right down to the bones. She stumbled, fingers scrabbling at the ground, and the municipal crew that responds to true emergencies arrived within minutes, headlights painting everything white. We watched from porches like villagers observing some strange public unmasking. She climbed out of her soggy shoes and screamed something about sabotage and payback, but her voice was small and wet and not as terrifying as the paper she had used to smell of power. There was an irony in the town's response. When the city's inspectors came, they didn't see a neat villain and a clear victim. They saw a mess made by people who'd forgotten to be neighbors. They found evidence of tampering, yes, and they cited Marlene, and they opened a file. But they also looked at our community with the eyes of civil servants who see this kind of thing as a civic failure. They asked about maintenance records and access permissions, and whether we had a neighborhood water plan. We had to answer questions about trust, about the quiet assumptions we'd made about one another, and that was when I realized the real wound wasn't the water, it was the rot that had crept in between us when one person decided they could govern by fear. The HOA convened an emergency meeting. Marlene presented documents, but she couldn't present dignity. The footage withstood every counter-argument. Her supporters dwindled to those who needed to belong to something that made them feel secure. In small claims courties, there was court. There were fines. There were emails that smelled of old grudges. Marlene argued for authority, and I, with a dry throat and a willingness to be boringly factual, argued for the record. The judge did the thing the judge does. He looked at the evidence, at municipal law, at common sense, and made a call that felt both trivial and vast. Marlene was fined, removed from the committee, and ordered to pay for repairs. But endings in life are never tidy. The neighborhood didn't become a utopia overnight. People picked sides and then showed up to apologize awkwardly, and others moved away, and Marlene's house sat quiet for a while with curtains closed like a wound. There was a moment a month later when I was mowing the lawn and Denise brought over a bottle of lemon iced tea and said, "You know, I always thought power was about control, but it's mostly about fear." We both laughed, a little sadly, because for a while we'd let small fears shape how we behave toward each other. What I keep thinking about, months later when the faucets sing and the pipes are patient and the neighborhood is trying to be neighborly again, is the shape of courage. Not the big cinematic kind that shows up in movies with a soundtrack, but the small, practical courage of showing up with a camera, of telling the truth in a meeting where your voice shakes, of sitting on your porch and saying hello to people even when they haven't been kind. There are ways to push back against someone who wants to hold a town hostage, laws, yes, but also a communal refusal to accept bullying as governance. I don't tell this story to make myself heroic. I'm petty, I'm stubborn, and sometimes I avoid conflict until it's too late, like most of us. I tell it because these are the things that quietly change a place. One person deciding they can weaponize rules, another deciding not to be ruled. If you watch the footage and think about Marlene standing in the rain, soaked and furious, remember that shame doesn't fix anything. Accountability does. And accountability isn't a private revenge, it's a public, communal act that says, we will not let fear be our law. If you've ever lived next to someone who thinks rules are their right to command, or if you've had a neighbor cross a line and you didn't know what to do, tell that story in the comments. I want to know what you did, what worked, what didn't. Was it legal action, public pressure, a quiet conversation over coffee? Tell me where you stand on justice versus mercy. In moments like this, though, we forgive a person who abused power if they make amends, or do we hold the line forever? Share your take. Share this if it resonates. And if you liked hearing a neighbor's story told slow and honest, Hit subscribe. There are more of these small civil wars out here, and we could learn to face them without turning on each other.